My name is Leonard. I'm 74 years old now, but the story I'm about to tell began when I was 70. That was the year I fell in love for the first time. Not when I was 20, not when I was 30, 70. And strangely enough, it happened through a small glowing screen sitting on my kitchen table. If you had told me 10 years earlier that I would meet someone online and feel my heart racing again like a young man, I would have laughed. People my age didn't grow up with the internet. We grew up knocking on doors, calling landline phones, meeting someone's parents before we even understood what dating meant. Romance used to feel physical and immediate. You saw the person. You heard their voice. You felt the nervous energy standing next to them. So the idea of digital romance sounded almost absurd to me. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. My wife passed away when I was 66, 42 years of marriage. When someone you shared that much life with disappears, the world becomes very quiet. The quiet isn't just in the house. It's in the routines, the small conversations that used to happen without thinking. What should we have for dinner? Did you hear what the neighbor said today? Little things that seemed ordinary suddenly vanish. For the first few years after she died, I told myself I was content being alone. I had hobbies. I walked every morning. I kept in touch with my children and grandchildren. From the outside, my life looked stable. But stability is not the same thing as companionship. Companionship is harder to replace than people realize. And loneliness has a way of sneaking up slowly. At first, it's just quiet evenings. Then it becomes entire weekends. Then you realize that the last real conversation you had lasted less than 5 minutes. My daughter was the one who suggested I try using the internet to meet people. I remember laughing when she said it. People my age don't do that, I told her. She smiled the way younger people smile when they know something you don't. You'd be surprised, she said. For several weeks, I ignored the idea. But curiosity has always been a weakness of mine. Eventually, one rainy afternoon, I sat down at my computer and created a profile on one of those websites. I didn't expect anything serious. I assumed I would browse for a few minutes, feel foolish, and close the laptop. But something unexpected happened. There were hundreds of people my age there. Widows, widowers, divorced people who had spent decades in complicated marriages. People who had lived full lives, but were now navigating the strange territory of being alone again. It was strangely comforting. Loneliness, I realized, was not unique to me. And then one evening, I received a message. Her name was Margaret, 72, retired teacher. Her message was simple. Hello, Leonard. I saw you like gardening. I do too. What do you grow? That was it. No dramatic introduction. Just a question about tomatoes. I answered politely. The next day she replied again. Another small message. Then another. Within a week we were exchanging longer letters, not quick messages, real thoughts, stories about our lives, memories about the people we had lost, the strange adjustments that come with aging. Something about writing made the conversation deeper than I expected. When people speak face to face, they often rush, but writing slows your thoughts down. You choose your words more carefully. You reveal things gradually. After 2 weeks, I realized something slightly embarrassing. I was looking forward to her messages. I would check my email in the morning before making coffee. I would reread parts of our conversations in the evening. It felt exciting. That word felt ridiculous at 70, but there it was, excitement. Eventually, we exchanged photographs. She had kind eyes, the kind of eyes that look like they have listened to many stories. And I remember feeling a strange nervousness when I saw her picture, because suddenly she wasn't just words on a screen. She was a real person, a person who might step into my life. But digital romance has its own rhythm. It unfolds differently than traditional relationships. You learn someone's mind before you hear their voice. You understand their thoughts before you see their expressions. And that creates a unique kind of intimacy. But it also hides certain truths. Because when you fall in love through a screen, you are not only meeting the other person, you are also meeting the version of them they choose to present. And I didn't fully understand that yet. Margaret and I wrote to each other every day. At first, the messages were short, a paragraph about something simple, what the weather looked like that morning, what we had planted in our gardens, a book she had finished reading. But over time, the messages grew longer. They began to feel less like notes and more like letters, real letters, the kind people used to write decades ago when communication moved slowly and thoughtfully. There was something comforting about that pace. When you write instead of speak, you don't interrupt each other. You take time to explain what you mean, and the other person takes time to read it carefully. Our conversations moved through many parts of our lives. We talked about the people we had loved. She had been married for 39 years before her husband died. We talked about how strange it felt to wake up in a house that no longer held another person's footsteps. That was something we understood immediately about each other. Loneliness after a long marriage is different than loneliness in youth. When you are young, loneliness feels like something that will eventually change. When you are older, it can feel like the final chapter. But talking with Margaret changed that feeling. Our messages began arriving like small moments of companionship in the middle of ordinary days. I would read her stories about teaching children for decades. She would read mine about working with my hands most of my life. We laughed about small things, the way technology confuses us sometimes, the way younger people type messages without punctuation, and slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, something deeper formed, anticipation. I began structuring parts of my day around our conversations. Morning coffee with her message, evening replies before bed. At 70 years old, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again, emotional closeness. But digital romance carries a strange paradox. The more you write, the more you feel you know someone, yet you are still separated by distance. Screens cannot show certain things, the way someone moves, the rhythm of their voice, the silence between sentences. Those details matter more than people realize. After about 2 months, Margaret suggested something simple. Maybe we should talk on the phone. That suggestion made me unexpectedly nervous. Writing had been comfortable. controlled. I could think before answering. But hearing someone's voice is different. It reveals emotion instantly. Still, I agreed. When the phone rang that evening, I felt like a teenager again. My hands were actually shaking a little. I answered, and her voice was softer than I expected. Calm, warm. We spoke for nearly an hour. And the strange thing was that the conversation flowed easily, almost exactly like our messages had. That phone call changed something. The connection felt more real, less like words on a screen, more like two people sharing a moment. After that, we began speaking once or twice a week, sometimes longer conversations, sometimes short check-ins. But there was still one step we hadn't taken, meeting in person. And that step felt larger than either of us expected. Digital relationships allow imagination to fill many spaces. You picture the other person's gestures, their expressions, the way they walk into a room. But imagination can be generous or misleading. The longer you wait to meet, the more expectations grow. Margaret lived about 3 hours away, not far, but far enough that a meeting required intention. Eventually, she wrote something that stayed with me. We should probably meet before we start inventing each other. She was right. Digital connection had brought us close, but real life needed to confirm what we had built. So we chose a small cafe halfway between our towns, a quiet place where two older strangers could meet without too much attention. The morning of that meeting, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear, because something important was about to happen. Either the connection we built online would become real, or it would dissolve the moment we sat across from each other. That is the truth about digital romance. It opens doors, but the real test begins when the screen disappears. The morning I drove to meet Margaret, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I needed extra time, because I couldn't sleep. It had been decades since I had felt that particular kind of nervous energy, the kind that makes you rehearse small details in your mind. What will I say when I see her? Will we recognize each other immediately? Will the conversation feel natural or awkward? At 70, you don't expect to feel those questions again. But there I was, standing in my kitchen, staring at my reflection in the window while the coffee brewed. 3 hours later, I arrived at the cafe. It was a quiet place, small wooden tables, the smell of fresh bread and coffee in the air. I arrived a little early, which is something I've always done when I'm anxious. So I sat near the window and waited. Those 15 minutes felt longer than the entire drive. And then the door opened. She stepped inside slowly, looking around the room. And I knew immediately. Not because of the photograph she had sent me, because of the way she carried herself. There was a calmness about her, a gentleness that matched the tone of her messages. When our eyes met, we both smiled in that slightly awkward way people do when something important is happening, but no one wants to make it dramatic. She walked toward the table. "Leonard," she said. I stood up and nodded. "Margaret." And suddenly all the nervousness faded. We sat down and started talking. Not cautiously, not formally, just talking. Exactly the way we had for months through messages and phone calls. Something about that surprised me, because I had expected the screen to have created an illusion. But in this case, the screen had simply introduced us. The real connection had grown through honesty. We spent nearly 3 hours in that cafe. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into a walk outside along the small street nearby. By the time we said goodbye that afternoon, something felt clear. The digital part of our relationship had not been a replacement for reality. It had been the beginning of it. But that doesn't mean digital romance is simple. Over the following months, Margaret and I learned the real truth about relationships that begin online. The internet can connect two minds quickly, but real life requires patience, travel, time together in ordinary situations, seeing how someone reacts when plans change, when a waiter gets the order wrong, when the weather ruins an afternoon walk. Those moments reveal more about a person than any message ever could. Margaret and I continued seeing each other regularly. Sometimes I drove to her town. Sometimes she came to mine. Our relationship moved slowly, the way relationships often did decades ago. And I think that slowness helped us. At our age, neither of us was chasing excitement. We were searching for companionship, someone to share conversations with, someone to sit beside during quiet evenings, someone to laugh with when life surprised us. Digital romance had opened the door, but what sustained our relationship was something much older than technology: attention, patience, respect. Now, 4 years after that first message about tomatoes, Margaret and I still see each other every week. Sometimes people ask me if meeting someone online at 70 was strange. I tell them the strange part wasn't the internet. The strange part was realizing that the heart does not retire just because the body grows older. Connection remains possible. Surprise remains possible. Love, even quiet, steady love, remains possible. The internet simply gave two lonely people a place to find each other. What we built after that had very little to do with technology. It had everything to do with two human beings deciding to keep showing up for each other. And at my age, I have learned something important. The beginning of a relationship can happen anywhere: a cafe, a park, or even a glowing screen on a kitchen table. But the truth about romance, digital or otherwise, is always the same. It only becomes real when two people step beyond the screen and begin sharing the ordinary moments of life together. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.